Do you know that health facilities and hospitals in most African countries depend on aid from the United States? You might wonder why, but the United States played cleverly and offered humanitarian aid to fight diseases like HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis. This was done so that almost all health facilities in Africa became reliant on the United States. This, in turn, ensured no African leader would come and challenge the United States in any way. If they did, the U.S. would stop the aid and punish the most vulnerable, the patients. And now, precisely the same is happening as Trump cut all aid to South Africa, in addition to ending 90% of USAID given to foreign countries. This immediate budget cut increases the chances of the collapse of the healthcare system in most African countries whose leaders, while being Western allies, did not invest in the country's hospitals. However, for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, this is the time to become self-sufficient in healthcare, using a strategy no other African leader ever thought of. Therefore, he recently launched 55 ultra-modern hospitals, which will not only treat Burkinabe patients, but people across the continent. However, how did Ibrahim Traoré achieve this? In this video, let's know about that in detail. For decades, the West has formulated a meticulously designed system of medical dependency that ensures Africa remains reliant on foreign donors, pharmaceutical companies, and healthcare aid programs. African nations have been systematically prevented from developing self-sufficient healthcare infrastructure, with their medical sectors tightly controlled by Western governments, multinational corporations, and financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank. Under this system, Africa's healthcare has been turned into a charity case rather than a right, where foreign aid is deliberately positioned as the only way for African governments to provide even basic services. International donors have conditioned funding on Africa remaining a consumer rather than a producer, blocking investment in domestic pharmaceutical production, limiting government spending on public health care, and ensuring that most hospitals remain dependent on imported medical equipment and Western-managed programs. But Ibrahim Traoré is tearing this system apart. By rejecting foreign aid and committing to the construction of 55 ultra-modern hospitals entirely with national resources, he is proving that Africa does not need Western handouts to build a healthcare system. He is exposing the myth of African helplessness, proving that what Africa lacks is not money, but leadership and strategic resource management. However, to truly understand the significance of Ibrahim Traoré's healthcare revolution, we must first analyze how the West deliberately ensured that Africa remained dependent on foreign aid for medical services. This dependency was not accidental, but a carefully structured system designed to prevent African nations from developing self-sufficient healthcare infrastructure. This dependency was maintained through three main methods: blocking Africa's ability to manufacture its own medicine, attaching political conditions to healthcare funding, and prioritizing foreign NGOs over national healthcare systems. One of the most effective ways the West has kept Africa's healthcare system weak is by sabotaging domestic pharmaceutical production. Africa is rich in natural resources necessary for medicine production, such as plants used in traditional medicine and raw materials for drug synthesis. However, African nations continue to rely on foreign pharmaceutical companies for over 70% of their medical needs. This dependency is not due to a lack of capacity, but because of deliberate policies enforced by Western-controlled financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. In exchange for loans, these institutions forced African governments to privatize essential industries, including pharmaceuticals, preventing the continent from building large-scale medicine production facilities. A prime example of this economic sabotage is Nigeria's pharmaceutical industry. In the 1980s, Nigeria had one of Africa's strongest drug manufacturing sectors, with local companies producing essential medicines for the population. However, under pressure from the IMF's Structural Adjustment Program, Nigeria was forced to privatize state-owned pharmaceutical firms and remove import restrictions on foreign drugs. This led to a flood of cheap Western and Indian imports, making it impossible for Nigerian companies to compete. Today, Nigeria imports over 70% of its medicines, and local production has never recovered. Ghana faced a similar fate when the World Bank pressured the government to lower tariffs on imported drugs in the 1990s. While the move was framed as promoting competition, it actually destroyed Ghana's local pharmaceutical industry. Ghanaian companies, unable to compete with multinational corporations, shut down. And today, the country relies on imports from Europe, India, and China instead of manufacturing its own medicines. South Africa, despite being home to Africa's most advanced pharmaceutical industry, was blocked from producing its own COVID-19 vaccines. When South Africa's Biovac Institute planned to manufacture COVID-19 vaccines, Western pharmaceutical firms refused to share patents and production technology. Even though South Africa had the facilities, it was forced to import vaccines from the very companies that denied it production rights. This was not just a public health failure, but a clear strategy to keep Africa dependent on Western medical supplies. Another tactic used by the West to control Africa's healthcare systems is through political conditions attached to healthcare funding. When African nations receive funding from institutions like USAID, the European Union, or the Gates Foundation, they are often required to adopt Western policies in return. This means that African governments cannot implement sovereign health policies without fear of losing crucial funding. This leverage is used as a weapon to punish African governments that do not align with Western interests. Burkina Faso saw this firsthand in 2023, when the U.S. cut millions in healthcare aid after Traoré expelled Western military forces and forged stronger ties with Russia. Rather than allowing Burkina Faso to use its own natural wealth to fund healthcare, the U.S. aimed to financially weaken the country, hoping that economic desperation would force Traoré to return to Western influence. But Traoré did not cave in. He built his own hospitals without Western aid. Uganda experienced a similar backlash when it passed laws rejecting certain Western cultural policies. In retaliation, the US and EU threatened to withdraw healthcare funding, effectively holding millions of Ugandans hostage, especially those dependent on Western-funded HIV and AIDS treatment programs. This tactic shows how healthcare is not used as a tool for humanitarian aid, but as a political weapon to manipulate African policies. Zimbabwe's healthcare sector was also deliberately crippled by Western sanctions after its land reform policies in the early 2000s. The US and EU imposed severe economic restrictions, making medical imports nearly impossible. As a result, hospitals collapsed due to a lack of supplies, and Zimbabwe's health system was portrayed as a failure, despite the fact that it was Western-imposed sanctions, not local mismanagement, that cut off access to medical resources. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. Another strategy the West has used to ensure Africa's healthcare remains fragmented and dependent on aid is by prioritizing foreign NGOs over African governments. Instead of supporting national healthcare programs, the West has flooded the continent with Western-controlled NGOs, which create temporary healthcare solutions but prevent long-term national healthcare development. These organizations function as a parallel system, where foreign groups, not African governments, provide medical services, ensuring that Africa never develops a centralized healthcare structure. The Gates Foundation is a prime example of how Western NGOs control Africa's healthcare narrative. While the foundation is praised for funding vaccination programs, it ensures that Africa remains dependent on Western pharmaceutical companies. Rather than investing in local vaccine production, Gates-funded programs purchase vaccines from Western firms, keeping Western corporations in control of profits, while Africa remains dependent on imports. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, Doctors Without Borders runs independent medical programs, often without coordination with the government. While their services provide short-term relief, they also undermine national healthcare development. Instead of strengthening DRC's health infrastructure, these foreign-run hospitals create a system where local doctors remain underpaid and undertrained, ensuring permanent dependence on Western aid. Ibrahim Traoré's response to this system of dependency has been revolutionary. By building 55 modern hospitals using Burkina Faso's own resources, he has proven that Africa does not need Western aid to build world-class healthcare infrastructure. His model directly challenges the entire neo-colonial system of healthcare control, showing that Africa can fund, operate, and sustain its own medical industry without begging for Western assistance. Traoré's approach is breaking every rule set by Western institutions to keep Africa weak. Instead of importing overpriced drugs, his administration is investing in domestic pharmaceutical production, so Burkina Faso no longer needs to rely on Western companies. Instead of accepting political conditions on healthcare funding, he is funding his hospitals through national resources, ensuring that Burkina Faso's medical policies serve the Burkinabe people, not Western interests. Instead of allowing NGOs to dictate healthcare priorities, he is building a state-funded, unified healthcare system that prioritizes long-term development over temporary donor-controlled programs. Interestingly, for years, African leaders have claimed that lack of funds prevents them from building modern healthcare infrastructure. Yet, Traoré has found a way to construct 55 world-class hospitals without relying on Western loans, aid, or debt-ridden agreements. Yes, even though the biggest source of capital for Traoré's development program is the country's natural resources, it's not the only source. One of Traoré's most decisive policies has been redirecting government spending from excessive military contracts into public health initiatives. Like many African nations, Burkina Faso has spent billions annually on security agreements with Western defense contractors, many of which have profited off conflicts while offering no real solutions. These contracts have ensured that Africa remains permanently engaged in conflicts that benefit Western arms dealers rather than truly securing the region. Recognizing this cycle, Traoré renegotiated Burkina Faso's military contracts and cut ties with Western defense firms that were bleeding the country's budget while keeping it dependent on foreign military aid. Instead, he prioritized investment in Burkina Faso's own security forces while ensuring that funds were redirected to building hospitals, purchasing medical equipment, and expanding medical training programs. This bold move has allowed his government to allocate resources toward healthcare without being shackled by Western financial institutions. Beyond restructuring military spending, Traoré has slashed excessive government expenditures that had previously drained public funds. High-ranking officials no longer enjoy bloated salaries and luxury perks at the expense of the people. His administration cut unnecessary foreign trips, expensive diplomatic engagements, and redundant government projects, ensuring that every dollar saved is invested into strengthening healthcare infrastructure. The results are now undeniable. Burkina Faso, a country once labeled as too poor to develop, is building some of the most advanced hospitals in West Africa without a single cent of Western aid. Until now, Burkina Faso has been one of the world's leading gold producers, yet its people remained among the poorest in Africa. Western mining corporations have extracted billions of dollars worth of gold, uranium, and other minerals, leaving Burkina Faso with little to show for its wealth. This is the same pattern seen across Africa. They are rich in resources, but economically exploited due to corrupt contracts signed by previous governments that allowed foreign companies to dominate land ownership and profit extraction. Traoré has dismantled this neo-colonial economic model. His administration has imposed new regulations ensuring that foreign corporations can no longer permanently own Burkina Faso's mineral-rich land. All existing mining contracts have been revised to guarantee that a larger share of revenue remains in the country, rather than being funneled into the bank accounts of foreign shareholders. For the first time in Burkina Faso's history, its vast gold reserves are being used to fund national development projects, especially in healthcare. The same mining profits that once enriched Western corporations while Burkina Faso's hospitals crumbled are now being redirected toward constructing 55 hospitals, training new doctors, and even building a pharmaceutical production plant. This approach stands in contrast to resource-rich African nations like Nigeria and Angola, where leaders sell off their natural wealth at exploitative rates, then turn around and beg the West for aid. Burkina Faso is proving that Africa's wealth is more than enough to fund its own development. It simply takes a leader willing to prioritize the people over Western corporate interests. One of the most groundbreaking aspects of Traoré's healthcare revolution is the establishment of Burkina Faso's first large-scale pharmaceutical production facility. Historically, Western pharmaceutical corporations have refused to share patents on life-saving drugs, forcing African countries to buy medications at inflated prices. They have lobbied for trade restrictions to prevent African governments from investing in local drug manufacturing. They have even influenced global health organizations to prioritize Western-produced vaccines and treatments over cheaper, locally made alternatives. Traoré is breaking this monopoly by investing in a fully independent pharmaceutical production facility that will manufacture essential medicines locally. This bold move will significantly reduce healthcare costs for Burkinabe citizens while eliminating the West's ability to control Burkina Faso's healthcare through medical supply dependency. With locally produced generic drugs available at a fraction of the cost, Burkina Faso will no longer be at the mercy of Western pharmaceutical giants that dictate which medicines Africa can access and at what price. In the long term, Traoré's initiative could transform Burkina Faso into a regional supplier of affordable medicine, reducing the continent's reliance on foreign imports while keeping healthcare revenues within Africa. While modern hospitals form the backbone of Traoré's healthcare vision, he has also recognized that centralized hospital systems are not enough to meet the needs of the entire population. In response, his government has deployed fully equipped mobile hospitals that provide direct medical services to rural and conflict-affected communities. In many African countries, healthcare infrastructure is heavily concentrated in major cities, leaving rural populations without access to basic medical services. This has resulted in higher maternal and infant mortality rates, outbreaks of preventable diseases, and an increasing gap between urban and rural healthcare outcomes. Traoré's mobile hospital initiative directly addresses this crisis by bringing healthcare to remote regions where citizens previously had to travel long distances for treatment. These mobile hospitals, staffed by trained Burkinabe doctors and nurses, symbolize a radical departure from the Western-funded NGO model that has long controlled African healthcare. Rather than relying on short-term foreign aid interventions, Burkina Faso is taking full responsibility for its healthcare system, ensuring that no citizen is left behind. Now, after seeing 55 ultra-modern hospitals being launched, the West is in panic. That's because it threatens the entire Western-dominated model of African dependency. His success proves that African nations do not need Western loans or charity to build world-class healthcare systems. If other African leaders follow Burkina Faso's example, it will result in the collapse of the Western aid for control model, which has kept Africa economically and politically dependent for decades. You see, Traoré is not just transforming Burkina Faso, he is setting a precedent for the entire continent. If his healthcare revolution succeeds, other African nations will no longer have an excuse to continue begging for Western aid while sitting on vast natural resources. The real question is no longer whether Burkina Faso can develop on its own. It already is. The question is whether other African leaders will rise to the challenge or continue selling their nations for Western scraps. What do you think? Should other African leaders learn from Ibrahim Traoré and make their countries self-reliant in healthcare? Isn't it true that the West intentionally did not allow the basic facilities to develop in Africa so it could blackmail them? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on what other sectors Ibrahim Traoré should make Burkina Faso self-reliant in. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.